picture this, a swamp, a stinking, mosquito-infested swamp on the edge of Lake Michigan. Now picture that same swamp 2 years later, glowing like something out of a dream. Hundreds of thousands of light bulbs, marble palaces that weren't even marble, and a wheel so massive it could lift you 264 feet in the air before Ferris wheels were even a thing people had a word for. This wasn't science fiction. This was Chicago, 1893, and what they built there in 18 months didn't just throw one heck of a party. It basically invented the 20th century. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're gonna look at every city skyline, every amusement park, even the cereal in your pantry, completely differently. Before we dive in, if you're into wild, true stories from history that nobody taught you in school, smash that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Okay, let's go back to 1890, and let's talk about a city with something to prove. Here's the thing about Chicago in 1890. Nobody respected it. New York looked at it like a loud, smoky, meat-packing backwater. Just 20 years earlier, in 1871, the Great Chicago Fire had burned down basically the entire downtown. Legend says a cow kicked over a lantern. Nobody's ever proven that. By the way, poor cow got blamed for nothing, probably, but the fire was real, and it was devastating. Over 300 people dead, 100,000 left homeless. So when the United States Congress decided it was time to throw a massive World's Fair, an exposition, to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus arriving in the Americas, everybody assumed New York City would host it. New York had the money. New York had the prestige. New York had, frankly, the ego, but Chicago wanted it bad. And Chicago fought dirty for it, in the most delightfully American way possible. City boosters raised over $5 million in pledges in a matter of weeks, practically shaming New York's fundraising efforts into the dirt. Newspapers mocked Chicago as an overgrown cowtown trying to play in the big leagues. And that's actually where the nickname, the Windy City, may have really taken off. Not because of the weather, but because New York reporters accused Chicago of being full of hot air and empty boasting. Chicago won the bid anyway. Congress announced it in 1890. And almost immediately, the city realized it had bitten off something enormous. They had about 2 years to build, from scratch, an entire temporary metropolis capable of hosting the whole world. Now here's the twist nobody expects. The site they picked wasn't some grand scenic lakefront property. It was Jackson Park, 600 acres of sand dunes, scrub brush, and swampland on Chicago's south side. Basically, nobody wanted to live there. It flooded, it was ugly, and that's exactly where they decided to build a magic city. To pull this off, Chicago needed the best builder in America, and they found him in a man named Daniel Burnham. Burnham was an architect with a chip on his shoulder and a saying that basically defines American ambition to this day: make no little plans. He wasn't kidding around. Burnham brought in Frederick Law Olmsted, the same guy who designed Central Park in New York, of all places, to handle the landscaping. Talk about petty poetic justice. New York's own park designer, helping Chicago build something bigger and better. Together, they assembled a dream team of the country's top architects. Guys who normally would never agree on anything, and somehow got them to work together on one unified vision. And that vision was bold, honestly kind of insane for the time. Build dozens of massive neoclassical buildings, Greek columns, Roman domes, the whole works, but paint every single one of them a brilliant, blinding white. Here's the catch though. There was no time and no budget to build these buildings out of actual marble or stone. So the architects came up with something almost sneaky clever. They used a material called staff, basically plaster of Paris mixed with jute fiber, molded over wood and steel frames, then painted white. It looked, from a distance, exactly like eternal Roman marble. Up close, it was basically fancy stucco held together with prayers and horsehair. They were literally building a movie set the size of a small city. And they were racing the clock while doing it. Workers battled brutal Chicago winters, labor strikes, a national economic depression that hit in 1893, right as the fair was supposed to open, and constant mud. And in the middle of all this chaos, tragedy struck close to home. Chicago's own mayor, Carter Harrison Sr., who had thrown his full support behind the fair, would later, on the fair's closing days, be assassinated in his own home by a disgruntled office seeker. It's a chilling reminder that even in the middle of celebrating human progress, 1893 America was still a rough, unpredictable, sometimes violent place. But somehow, through debt, through delays, through disaster, Burnham's team got it done. And on May 1st, 1893, President Grover Cleveland pressed a golden telegraph key, and the whole fairground roared to life. Now imagine you're an ordinary American in 1893. Maybe you're a farmer from Kansas, or a factory worker from Ohio. You've never seen electric light outside of a single flickering bulb in a store window, if that. Most homes still use oil lamps and candles. Indoor plumbing is a luxury. The idea of a skyscraper is brand new and honestly kind of terrifying to some people. And then you step through the gates of the world's Columbian Exposition, and suddenly you're standing in front of the Court of Honor, a massive, reflecting lagoon surrounded by towering white buildings, each one bigger than most cathedrals back home. The Manufactures and Liberal Arts building alone was the largest enclosed structure ever built on planet Earth at that point. You could have fit the US Capitol building inside it multiple times over, and then night falls. And that's when the real magic happens. Because this fair was powered by something almost nobody in America had ever seen at this scale: electricity. Hundreds of thousands of incandescent light bulbs outlined every building, every walkway, every fountain. Visitors literally wept. Grown men and women, standing there in the dark, watching an entire fake city light up like the heavens had come down to Lake Michigan. They started calling it, simply, the White City. And get this, right next door, literally connected by footpath, was the complete opposite experience, the Midway Plaisance. If the White City was elegant, refined, almost holy, the Midway was pure carnival chaos. Belly dancers, imported villages, meant to represent cultures from around the globe, food you'd never tasted, and the single biggest crowd magnet of the entire fair. Here's where the story gets genuinely wild. Chicago wanted something to top the Eiffel Tower, which had stunned the world just 4 years earlier at the Paris Exposition, and an engineer named George Washington Gale Ferris Jr. Yes, that's really his name, stepped up with an idea so audacious that fair organizers initially thought he was nuts. He proposed a gigantic rotating steel wheel, 264 feet tall, with 36 enclosed cars, each one capable of holding up to 60 people. That's over 2,000 people riding at once. Skeptical engineers said the whole thing would collapse under its own weight. Ferris built it anyway, and when it opened, it became the single most talked about attraction at the entire fair. We literally call the ride category Ferris wheels today because of this one guy's stubborn refusal to be told no. Not bad for a legacy, right? But maybe the juiciest behind-the-scenes drama of the whole fair was the fight over who would even provide the electricity to light the White City in the first place. This was the middle of the so-called War of the Currents, a brutal business feud between Thomas Edison, who championed direct current, or DC power, and George Westinghouse, backed by the brilliant and eccentric inventor Nikola Tesla, who championed alternating current, AC power. Edison had spent years trying to convince the public that AC power was dangerous. He'd even been involved in publicity stunts to scare people about it. But when it came time to bid for the contract to light the entire World's Fair, Westinghouse underbid Edison's company dramatically and won. And it worked beautifully. The success of AC power at the Chicago Fair basically settled the War of the Currents for good. It's the reason the power grid running through your walls right now, in your house, uses alternating current. You can thank, or blame, a Ferris Wheel era fair in Chicago for that. And by the way, some everyday American staples were born right there on the fairgrounds too. Juicy fruit gum, Cracker Jack, shredded wheat cereal. Even the Pledge of Allegiance was first recited publicly in association with the fair's opening dedication ceremonies the year before. Next time you're eating cereal for breakfast, just know that little piece of Americana has roots in a swamp-turned fantasy city on Lake Michigan. 27 million people came through those gates over just 6 months. Keep in mind, the entire US population at the time was around 65 million. That means close to half the country, in ratio, experienced this fair in some way. An almost unbelievable cultural moment, all packed onto the shores of Lake Michigan. But here's the twist that gives this whole story its bittersweet ending. The White City was never meant to last. It was staff and wood and plaster, built fast and cheap to look eternal. When the fair closed at the end of October 1893, the plan was always to tear it down. Except fate had other ideas. In January of 1894, a massive fire tore through the abandoned fairgrounds, and within hours, most of the magical White City that had captivated the entire world was reduced to ash and rubble. The dream city that took 2 years and untold sweat to build was gone in an afternoon, almost gone anyway. One building survived, the Palace of Fine Arts. It was rebuilt with permanent materials years later, and if you go to Chicago today, you can still walk inside it. It's now the Museum of Science Industry. So next time you visit, know you're standing inside the very last living piece of the White City. And here's the part that really matters. The part that connects 1893 straight to your life today, wherever you're watching from. The success of Daniel Burnham's grand unified vision at the fair sparked something called the City Beautiful movement. Suddenly, mayors and planners across America started asking, why can't our real cities look this inspiring? Why can't we have wide boulevards, grand civic buildings, organized parks, unified architecture? Cities like Washington, D.C., Cleveland, and San Francisco redesigned entire districts based on principles born right there in Jackson Park. Even Walt Disney, whose father actually worked as a laborer helping construct the fairgrounds, grew up hearing stories about this magical, glowing, impossible White City. Some historians genuinely believe those stories planted the earliest seed for what would eventually become Disneyland and the entire concept of a fully immersive theme park experience. So think about that for a second. A swamp, 18 months, a city built out of plaster and ambition. And from those ashes came modern American urban planning, the power grid in your walls, the Ferris wheel at your local fair, and maybe even the DNA of Disneyland itself. That's the story of the White City. The temporary miracle that Chicago built to prove a point to New York, and ended up rewriting the future of the entire country instead. If this blew your mind even half as much as it blew mine putting it together, do me a favor. Hit subscribe. Drop a comment telling me which detail surprised you the most, and I'll see you in the next one.